Thank you very much for this honor. Receiving the WinWinno Peacebuilding Award is both deeply moving and humbling. Humbling due to the nature of your esteemed organization, which is doing necessary and incredible work. Thank you for the honor that you are giving me. It is also humbling as I'm being recognized for the work of one person. This work emerged from thousands of conversations, countless moments of conflict, and extraordinary colleagues and students, and from the courage of people willing to stay in relationship with one another when it would have been easier to. Receiving this award gives me an opportunity to reflect on the journey that led me to Lewis Deep Democracy, and I'd like to share a little of that story with you. I'm sure that as I tell my story and explain some of the basic principles of Lewis Deep Democracy, you, as an international mediator organizer, will find similarities with your values and principles. I would love for us to have time to dialogue and share, to hear your views based on the very important work you do. I was born into a poor white family in South Africa. Within months of my birth, my mother developed cancer and spent long periods in the hospital. Her cancer was never cured. My parents divorced when I was very young, and due to the stress of her illness and the divorce, my mother suffered a mental breakdown. She continued to be hospitalized for cancer and mental illness throughout her life. My father, a war veteran who suffered post-traumatic stress, found it difficult to cope and would often become abusive. Those experiences shaped me profoundly, and through many years of reflection and therapy, came to recognize not only the wounds of my childhood, but also its gifts: survival, independence, curiosity, sensitivity, awareness, and compassion, and a profound sense of appreciation for my parents' suffering and their struggles to stay alive and care for their children. At the same time, growing up in apartheid South Africa, I became aware of another reality. Although my family struggled financially, I was afforded opportunities denied to others simply because I was white. From an early age, I lived with the paradox of feeling both vulnerable and privileged. Looking back, I believe that the paradox planted the seeds for much of what would become Lewis Deep Democracy. Years later, in the early 1990s, my husband Greg and I were approached by a senior executive at Eskom, South Africa's state-owned national electricity company. The organization was undergoing profound change. South Africa itself was in transition, and while history often describes our transition from apartheid to democracy as peaceful, those of us who lived through it know that it was also a period of immense tension, violence, fear, anger, grief, and uncertainty. The country stood on the edge of civil war. Strikes, protests, political violence, and deep racial divisions were part of everyday life. Within Eskom, leaders were attempting to transform an organization built on apartheid principles. The company was moving from a highly hierarchical structure to a flatter and more participative one. The intention was admirable. The reality was far more complicated. Up until then, people of color had been excluded from leadership positions. In fact, they didn't have a voice at all. As the hierarchy flattened, issues that had previously been hidden began to surface. Long suppressed feelings emerged: anger, shame, resentment, mistrust, fear, and pain into the room. Conversations that had never been possible suddenly had to happen. And there were additional complexities. South Africa is truly a rainbow nation with different cultures and ethnic groups. We were not dealing only with race. We were dealing with culture, language, history, power, gender, and tradition. For example, In some cultural traditions, younger people would not speak before their elders had spoken. In other situations, women would not readily speak in the presence of men. What we discovered was that the problem was not simply organizational, it was deeply human. We quickly realized that no amount of expert intervention could resolve every conflict. Even if we had an army of psychologists, the task would have been impossible. The challenge was too large. One executive gave us extraordinary permission. He said, "We don't mind what you do, as long as something works." That freedom allowed us to experiment. We asked ourselves a different question. How can we teach people to fish rather than fish for them? How can ordinary people learn to recognize tension, understand difference, and work constructively with conflict themselves? Our breakthrough came when we stopped treating emotional issues as separate from business issues. We recognized that the so-called irrational emotions were already influencing rational decision-making. Conflict was not happening outside the meeting. It was happening inside the meeting. So we began creating practical tools that people could use in real time. We developed ways for groups to diagnose what was happening beneath the surface. We created methods for surfacing differences safely. We designed processes that help people engage with conflict before tensions became overwhelming. And over the following 3 years, more than 1,500 people participated in the program. Slowly, the culture began to change. People who had previously viewed one another as enemies started finding ways to work together. The method spread. What began as an intervention within a single South African organization became the foundation of Lewis Deep Democracy. For the next 3 decades, the work traveled beyond South Africa to other parts of Africa, into Europe, North and South America, Russia, Australia, and the Middle East. The contexts changed, but the challenges remained remarkably similar. Wherever human beings gather, differences emerge. Wherever differences emerge, tension follows. And wherever tension exists, we have a choice. Unfortunately, most of us were never taught how to work with tension. In many families, conflict was avoided, suppressed, or expressed through anger and violence. Schools often taught compliance rather than dialogue. Society taught us how to win arguments, but really how to stay in relationship while disagreeing. So we learned 3 familiar responses: to fight, to withdraw, or to pretend that everything is fine. None of these address the tension that exists. In developing Lewis Deep Democracy, we found a different response. We found that people need to consciously recognize the tension in the room. And then, through utilizing special Lewis Deep Democracy debate process, lean into the tension, to say your say strongly and to be emotional, not to deny one's feelings, to listen deeply to the other's views, and then discover the wisdom hidden within the differences, resulting in innovative solutions, which all can buy into. And as a result, relationships are strengthened. This is ultimately the heart of Lewis Deep Democracy. It is not simply a method for managing conflict. Rather, it is a way of helping people remain in relationship with one another while facing the realities of difference. And for me, personally, it remains a profound privilege that a methodology born in the complexities of South Africa has been able to contribute in some small way to conversations around the world. About 2 years before Greg, my husband, died, he made a decision I remain deeply grateful for. After years of traveling the world and working intensively with organizations and communities, he decided to semi-retire. Retirement gave him 2 precious years to spend his time doing what he loved. And we retained one business client in the UK. During those 2 years of Greg's retirement, I took Lewis Deep Democracy into areas that were especially close to my heart. The first being education. I had long believed that if we truly wanted a different future, we needed to begin with children. I wanted and still want young people to learn how to work with tension, how to find their voice, how to recognize that differences of opinion are inevitable, and learn to lean into resolving those differences. The second area was healthcare. At the time, South Africa was engaged in the difficult task of rolling out antiretroviral treatment for people living with HIV/AIDS. South Africa's HIV/AIDS was so widespread that it was named a pandemic. We worked with counselors who themselves had HIV and who were dealing with the enormous emotional burden of supporting people through this awful process. Although a pandemic, it was a silent, secret one. People were scared to speak, and being open about their disease was discouraged in the communities. Once again, the principles of enabling people to have a voice, to express their fears, to witness and connect with one another, to form relationships that enabled them to cope, proved invaluable. When Greg died suddenly, I faced a difficult crossroad. The UK business consultancy, our one overseas client, asked whether I would continue the work. They had seen its benefits and its impact, and it had become a core part of their consulting practice. At the time, I was so overwhelmed by grief and still in the shock phase. I agreed. Had I been more functional and less in shock, I'm not sure whether I would have continued. And the method may well have died along with Greg. But in shock, I tended to do as I was asked, rather than question it. Over the following years, I focused on training trainers. In time, those trainers became the elders, the leaders of future instructor training. And today, more than 100 people around the world have been trained as instructors in Lewis Deep Democracy. They're carrying the work into organizations, communities, schools, government, and civil society initiatives. Thousands of people have been through the training programs, and they in turn have taken the training into their homes, work, spaces, and communities. The method and its special tools have been used in a myriad of places and has spread across continents. Gives me particular joy is that the work continues to evolve. Throughout my career, I have been privileged to work in many countries and in many varied spaces and places where people were trying to bridge profound differences, seeking ways to engage across seemingly impossible divides. I have worked with peace and reconciliation, initiatives connected to the conflict in the Northern Ireland, remaining tensions between Jews and Germans living in present-day Germany, in Israel and Palestine, and in the Turkish Spring, racial tension, gender issues, homophobia, ageism, poverty, disability, refugees, and xenophobia. I have worked with communities, educators, government departments, coaches, community and business leaders, and organizations facing the challenge of living and working together across difference. Each of these situations, lesson has been the following. People do not need to agree in order to move forward together. They do have ways to listen and to hear one another, to understand one another, and remain in relationship with one another. Today, Lewis Deep Democracy has grown far beyond the work that Greg and I first developed. As I look back, I feel humbled by the journey. I have been fortunate enough to meet extraordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. I've witnessed courage, reconciliation, creativity, compassion, resilience in some of the most difficult situations imaginable. And perhaps that remains my greatest lesson. Human beings are capable of far more than we often imagine. Looking back over the past 35 years, I have come to believe that the most important question facing humanity is not how do we become the same, but rather how do we remain in relationship when we are different. Everything I have learned suggests that when people are given a voice, where they are genuinely heard, and when they are willing to lean into rather away from difference, something extraordinary becomes possible. The wisdom of the whole emerges. Today, my deepest hope is that these skills become part of everyday life. Imagine if intimate partners and families could learn tools to resolve their tension instead of suppressing their feelings or exploding with rage. Imagine if children learned how to navigate disagreement before they learned to fear it. Imagine if workplaces viewed tension as information rather than a problem. If communities learned how to listen across differences rather than retreat into polarization. In a world increasingly divided by ideology, politics, identity, and fear, these capabilities are no longer optional, they are essential. As I accept this award, I do so with gratitude. First to Christiane van Lister, one of the German instructors and a friend who nominated me for the award, for my daughter and work partner, Bellamy Peddle, my other partner, Carmen Girard, and our close working team of a special three, the many LDD instructors and a community across the world, my son Doran, my close family and friends who have traveled this journey with me. A special thanks to my soulmate Greg, whose love and partnership helped make this work possible. Thank you for the award. Thank you for listening to my story. And thank you for the incredible work you as an organization do.